Hello everyone. Before starting the video, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. Thanks. About previous video. In my previous video, I covered the theoretical aspects of the following topics. Number 1. What is FTP? Number 2. What is FTP used for? Number 3. What is an FTP server? Number 4. What do we need to configure an FTP server on our network? Number 5. What to do if we don't have a PC with high specs and the Windows Server OS? So, if you don't know what basically an FTP and FTP server is, then before proceeding, watch my previous video, so that you will have better idea about an FTP and FTP server. If you already know that what FTP and FTP server is, then proceed to watch this video. I will now move forward towards the actual video, considering that you already know about FTP and FTP server. Let's start. What is this video about? Welcome to this tutorial. Today, in this video, I'll be guiding you through the practical steps to configure an FTP server on a Windows 10 machine. Follow along, and you'll learn how to set it up yourself, step by step. To ensure a clear understanding of how to configure an FTP server on a Windows 10 machine, please watch this video completely, without skipping any part. After setting up the FTP server, I'll also demonstrate testing it with various permissions. Let's dive right into the practical steps. Step number 1. Assigning a static IP address. First, an important step is that we must assign a static IP address to our PC. As we know that, we can connect our PC to the network via Ethernet port and via wireless connection, but, for better performance and data transfer rate, it is recommended that we must prefer the Ethernet port over wireless connection. So, to assign a static IP address, I will right-click on the network connections or the computer icon in the right bottom corner of the screen. Then I will click on the option, Open Network and Internet Settings. Now I will click on the option, Change Adapter Options. Since I am connecting my PC to the network via Ethernet port, so I will right-click on the Ethernet and then I will click on the Properties option. Here on this page, double-click on the option, Internet Protocol version 4. As we can see that, I already have assigned a static IP address to my PC. On this page, if we haven't assigned any static IP address, then we will choose the second option which says, use the following IP address, to manually enter the static IP address here, along with the subnet mask of our network. If a DHCP server is configured on the network, it's necessary to reserve an IP address for the PC on that DHCP server. So that, whenever this PC sends request for an IP address, it will get the same IP address each time from DHCP server. After assigning a static IP address, now click on the OK button. Now click on the Close button. Assigning a static IP address step is completed. Step number 2. Creating a folder to store the client's data. In this step, I will create a folder on my PC's desktop. We can create this folder anywhere on our PC, such as on drive C, D or E, etc. Basically, this is the folder where all the data of the clients will be stored. We need to make sure that we create this folder on a drive where enough space is available to save all the data of the clients. For demonstration purpose, I will simply create a folder on my PC's desktop named FTP-infotech. We can create this folder with any name, which we want to, but I would suggest a simple name, which will be easy to remember for all the clients who will be accessing this FTP server. To create a folder, I will right-click on my PC's desktop, and then I will create a new folder. As I mentioned before in this video, I will name this folder FTP-infotech. That's it. The folder to store the client's data has been created. Let's proceed towards the next step. Step number 3. Installing FTP services. Now, we are going to install the FTP services on this PC. Let me share that, after installing the FTP services on this Windows 10 machine, this machine will then start providing services of an FTP server, after proper configurations. To install the FTP services on this PC, I'll go to the control panel. To access the control panel, I will simply type the word control panel in the search box, and then I will click on the control panel above in the searched results. On the control panel page, if the icons look different from the icons on my PC's screen, then click on the category option on the top right side of the page and, in the drop-down menu, select Small Icons option. Now, click on the option, which says, Programs and Features. On the left side of this page, click on the option, Turn Windows Features On or Off. Wait for a moment, so that all the features will be displayed here. I will scroll down here and I will go to the Internet Information Services option. Click on the plus sign in front of the Internet Information Services, and then select the sub-options FTP Server and, under this option, also select FTP Extensibility in FTP Service. Now go to the Web Management Tools option, and the same way, click on the plus sign, and then select IIS Management Console. After selecting all these options, I will click on the OK button to install all these features on my PC. If by any chance, we forget to select any required additional features or services, then after clicking on the OK button, the pop-up message may appear, which will ask us to install the required additional features or services. We need to confirm that if it happens. But since I selected all the required features and services, that is why it doesn't ask me for anything and the installation process will start. We will wait for a moment, so that the Windows will search for all the selected files to be installed on this PC. It will take a moment. So just wait and relax. I will forward this video here, so that it won't take too much time, because I care about your precious time. Here we can see the message, when it says, Applying Changes, which means, services are being installed. Upon appearing this message, Windows completed the requested changes. Means we are done here, and all the features and services have been installed successfully on this machine. I will now click on the Close button to close the Features and Services page. And then I will close the Programs and Features page as well. Installing FTP Services step has been completed successfully. Let's proceed towards the next step. Step number 4. Creating FTP Site with basic settings. To configure FTP Server, we will have to create the FTP Site first. To create the FTP Site, I will need to open Internet Information Services. I can access the Internet Information Services using two methods. Number 1 is through the control panel, and number 2 is by simply typing the word IIS in the search box. I will show you both the methods to access the Internet Information Services. To access the Internet Information Services using the first method, I will open my computer or this PC. And then in the address bar, I will type Control Panel. After typing the Control Panel in the address bar, press the Enter button. If the Control Panel page appears like this, then click on the Category option on the top right side of this page. In the drop-down list, click on the Small Icons option. Now click on the Administrative Tools. We can see the Internet Information Services on this page. We can double-click on Internet Information Services to open it from here, but I will show you the other simple method as well. The second and the simple method, to access and open the Internet Information Services, we can simply type IIS in the search box, and the windows will search for Internet Information Services. I will open the Internet Information Services as administrator. The Internet Information Services Manager page will open. Here on the left side of the page, we will see the name of our PC. Click on the arrow-like button to expand the list. Under this, we can see a folder-like icon named Sites. Click on the arrow button again to expand the further available options. Here, we can see that the only default website option is available under the Sites. Now, to add my FTP server, I will right-click on the option Sites. And then I will click on the Add FTP Site option. Adding FTP Site wizard will start now. Note: before proceeding, keep this in mind that, first I will go through the simple options here, while configuring the FTP server. It is just to make it simple for everyone to understand easily that, how to configure it. Later on in this video, I will explore all the necessary options which we need for our daily routine. So, don't worry and stick with me. Let's start. Here, I will type the name of my FTP server. I will name it as infotech-ftp. We can give it any name as per our convenience. I would recommend a simple name which will be easy to remember. In the physical path, I will click on the Browse button, and then I will select the folder, which I created on the desktop to store the client's data. Click on the OK button. For ease of management, we could give the same names to our FTP site and the folder. However, I've chosen slightly different names just to demonstrate that it doesn't even matter. After typing the name of the FTP site and selecting the FTP folder on the desktop, I will click on the Next button. On the Binding and SSL Settings page, we need to select the IP address of our FTP server. In my case, since I am using my PC for testing purposes, hence I have assigned multiple IP addresses to my PC's Ethernet. So, I will select the one, which I want to assign to this FTP server. I will click on the down arrow button, and in the drop-down list, select the IP address 10.0.2.56. Remember, this is the IP address that will be used by all the clients, when accessing this FTP server. If we have only single IP address assigned to our PC's Ethernet, then only one IP address will be shown here. The default port of FTP server is 21, I will leave it as the default port number. We can change this port number as well, but, in this video I will proceed with the default port number. Make sure that the option, Start FTP Site automatically, is checked. In the SSL options, since I do not have any SSL, so, I will select the option, No SSL. We can change all these options later on, but for now, I will go with the simple and basic options first. Now I will click on the Next button. On the Authentication and Authorization Information page, under the Authentication options, I will select the Anonymous option, which means that everyone will have access to this FTP server without any user's login credentials or user verification. In simple words, we can say that by selecting the Anonymous option, we are even allowing unknown users to access this FTP server without any restrictions. I will show you later on in this video that, what will happen, if we change this option from Anonymous to Basic. Under the authorization options, I will simply allow access to all users. This means that all users, from local network, from domain or, from public network, will have access to the server. Later in the video, I'll demonstrate how to restrict specific users from accessing the FTP server. Under the permissions portion, I will select both the read and write permissions, means that all the users can upload, download, create, edit and delete all the files and folders on this FTP server. For now, I am allowing all users, including unknown ones, with full permissions to access this FTP server. You might be wondering, why I'm doing this. It is, because I want to keep everything simple at the beginning. We'll make changes once we properly configure the FTP server with basic and simple options. Later on in the video, I will thoroughly test this FTP server with all possible options and permissions. The basic and simple configuration of the FTP server has been completed. So I will now click on the Finish button to finish the configuration wizard. We can see that, the infotech-FTP site has been created successfully. After creating the FTP site, I will now test its connectivity, with the folder selected in the physical path during this wizard. To do this, I will simply right-click on the FTP site, and I will select the Explore option. As we can see, we have successfully accessed the FTP folder on the desktop, which confirms that, the FTP site has access to the selected folder. It is important to note that, this is the folder, where all client data will be stored, so ensuring connectivity between the FTP site and this folder is very crucial before proceeding. This step has been completed successfully. Now we will proceed towards the next step. Step number 5. Allow FTP application access through Windows Firewall. After FTP site creation, we need to allow FTP application access through Windows Firewall. To do that, I will simply type the word allow in the search box on the taskbar, and from the searched results, I will then click on the Allow an app through Windows Firewall. On this page, click on the button Change Settings. If you are not an administrator, then it will ask for the administrator credentials. But since I am already logged in with admin credentials, that's why it didn't ask me to enter the admin credentials. In the given below applications, click on any one application, and then from the keyboard press the F key. Press again and again the F key from the keyboard until find the FTP server. As we can see, the checkbox in front of the FTP server is not yet checked. Check the FTP server, and then we can allow or restrict the access of this application for different networks like domain, private, and public networks. Since I am using my FTP server on my local network, and I will only allow my FTP server to be accessed by the clients on my domain and private networks. I will simply check the checkbox in the domain and the private column. This means that, this FTP server will be accepting client requests to access this FTP server, provided that, these users must be from either the same domain or, my private network. If we want to access this FTP server over the internet, in that case, we will also check the checkbox in the public network column. After allowing the FTP application access through the Windows Firewall for domain and private networks, I will click on the OK button. That's it. FTP application access has been allowed through Windows Firewall against the domain and private networks successfully. Note: we can also temporarily turn off the Windows Firewall or the overriding antivirus for the testing purposes, and later on we may turn it on after successful testing and then allow FTP application access through Windows Firewall only for specific networks. Step number 6. Assigning access permissions to FTP folder. Since all the client's data will be stored in the folder, which I created on the desktop, and all the clients will be accessing the same folder to upload or download the data. Hence I will configure the access permissions for this folder. By access permissions I mean that, who will be allowed to access this folder and what permissions they will have. Before proceeding further, please keep this in mind that, although I logged into my PC with a local admin, not a domain user, but my PC is on the domain network. In simple words, I have joined my PC to my domain, but I am logged in with a local admin, not a domain user or domain admin. I shared this just for the information, in case you have any query in your mind. It doesn't matter otherwise. Now, to assign permissions, I will right-click on the folder, which I created on the desktop, to store the client's data. Now I will click on the Properties option. Click on the Security tab. Click on the Edit button. Click on the Add button. Now click on the Advanced button. Click here on the Find Now button. By clicking on the Find Now button, all the users and groups will be searched and displayed at the bottom of this page. As I mentioned before that, initially I will go with the simple options, to configure and test this FTP server. That is the reason, I will ask my FTP server that, for now, let everyone access this folder, with all the permissions. By everyone I mean, the domain users and, the users from private or workgroup networks. How will I do that? I will search for the users group named Everyone. I will select this group named Everyone, and then I will click on the OK button. Again I will click on the OK button. Now on this page, I have to assign permissions to the group, which I selected. First I will click on the Everyone in the group or username box. Then from the permissions for everyone, I will check permissions that I wanted to assign to this group. For now, I will check all the allowed permissions. Now I will click on the Apply button. Then click on the OK button and, again click on the OK button. That's it, we have assigned full permissions to all users, including the domain and local network users, who will be going to access this folder. Let's go to the next step. Step number 7. Testing FTP server with anonymous user and full permissions. In this step, I will configure an FTP server to accept requests from all clients without authentication. This means that clients accessing the FTP server will not be required to enter any credentials, and they will have full permissions. After this configuration, I will then test a client accessibility without authentication to the FTP server. To configure my FTP server, I will open IIS Manager and then I will click on my FTP site, which I created before in this video. On the right side, I will double-click on First FTP option, FTP Authentication, to open it. There are two types of FTP server authentication. Number 1. Anonymous. The word anonymous means, have no identity. Having said that if the anonymous option is enabled, then all users accessing the FTP server will not be required to enter the credentials, I mean, the username and password. Number 2. Basic. In this type of authentication, all users will be required to enter the login credentials. If a user, without login credentials, try to access the FTP server, that user will not be able to access the FTP server. In this video, as mentioned earlier, I will test the FTP server by attempting to access it as an unknown user. Therefore, I will ensure that the anonymous authentication option is enabled, while the basic authentication option is disabled. Now, to assign authorization permissions, I will click on my FTP site, and then select the FTP authorization rules option. Here, I have set both read and write permissions to allow for all users, meaning that all users will have both read and write access. Now, I will minimize the IIS Manager page. Next, I will navigate to the FTP folder. And I will create a new folder named Anonymous with all permissions. Inside this folder, I will create a text file named test data. These are just testing files and folders, just to show you that how it will work. These files and folders can have any name, the specifics don't matter. I will navigate back to the FTP folder's root location and create a new text file named test2. Now, I will go to a client PC on my network, and from the client PC, I will try to access the FTP server. On this client PC, I will open my computer, and in the address bar, I will type the full URL like ftp:// followed by the IP address of the FTP server, followed by the colon, and then the FTP port number. After typing the address, I will press the Enter button to access the FTP server. We can see that the user has accessed the FTP server successfully without being prompted to enter any credentials. What happened? We found nothing on the server here. Don't worry. Upon refreshing, we can see the folders and files here, which I created on the FTP server. Next, we will check the write permission. To check the write permission, I will try to delete, create, rename and upload the files and folders on the FTP server. So, I will first try to delete the text file. The file has been deleted. Now, I will try to delete the folder as well. The file and folder, both have been deleted successfully. Now, I will try to create some files and folders on FTP server with this anonymous user having all the permissions. So, I will first try to create a new folder. The folder is created. Now I am going to rename this folder just to check all the permissions. I will name it as Test from the Client. Now, let me check if this user has permission to upload something. To confirm that, I will go to the desktop and I will cut a text file, which I created on the desktop, then I will paste it in the FTP folder. We can see that this anonymous user has successfully deleted, created, renamed and uploaded the files and folder on the FTP server. Now, I will go to the FTP server and check either the file and folder, which I created with the anonymous user, are also present there on the FTP server or not. On the FTP server, we can see that both the file and folder is available here as well, which again prove that all the users, including the unknown users, have permissions to read, delete, create, and upload the data to FTP server. In this step, we have successfully tested an anonymous or unknown user, with all the possible permissions. That's it. Let's go to the next step. Step number 8. Testing FTP server with local users and basic authentication. In this step, we will learn how to enable basic authentication and how to configure a local user to access this FTP server. So, I will go to the IIS Manager and click on my FTP site. Then first I will go to the FTP authentication. We can see that anonymous authentication is enabled while the basic authentication is disabled. I will simply disable the anonymous authentication. To disable it, I will right-click on the anonymous authentication, and then in the drop-down menu, simply click on the Disable option. The same way, I will enable the basic authentication. The anonymous authentication is now disabled, and the basic authentication has been enabled. Secondly, I will go to the FTP authorization page. Here we can see that, by default, the FTP server will allow all users to access this FTP server with full read and write permissions. It means that any user who access this FTP server with login credentials will have all the read and write permissions. After enabling the basic authentication, let me first verify it by accessing this FTP server from a client PC on the same network. I will now go to a client PC and then I will open my computer, or this PC. In the address bar, I will type the full URL, as I did before in this video. Upon accessing the FTP server from a client PC, we can see that it is now asking to enter the login credentials. Which means that the basic authentication has been enabled and confirmed. If I try to access the FTP server as an anonymous user, just by checking the checkbox option, which says Log on anonymously, we can see that anonymous user or unknown user without having login credentials is not allowed. The question is, how will we configure a user with login credentials to access this FTP server from a client PC? Let me show you. I will now go to the FTP server. Here, let me show you that I have created two users, I mean the local users on this FTP server. If I open the device manager, we will see that two users named FTP-local and FTP-local2 have been created on this FTP server locally. I also have assigned the passwords to these two local users. I will now go to the client PC, and from there, I will try to access this FTP server by entering the login credentials of one of these users, which I created on FTP server. I will try with the first user named FTP-local. So after entering the login credentials of a local user, if I click on the logon button, we will see that this user has successfully accessed the FTP server without any hurdle. As I showed you, by default the FTP server will let anyone access FTP server with full permissions, provided that the client has login credentials. After login, I will check the permissions by first creating a folder and renaming it. The folder has been created and renamed successfully. Now I will try to delete this folder. The user is also able to delete the file or folder on the FTP server. If I try to upload a file to the FTP server, we will find that the user can also upload the documents to this FTP server. The question is, what if we want to restrict some users with limited permissions? To assign the limited or specific permissions to a user, first I will change the default allow permissions in IIS authorization to read only. Having said that, any user with login credentials will now have only the read permission. Means that the users can only read and download the data from FTP server. Until and unless the user has assigned specific permissions to create, delete, or upload the files. So, I will right-click on the default allow rule and I will click on the edit option. I will uncheck the write permission from the default allow rule. Click on the OK button to apply the changes. Now I will go to the client PC to verify that the default permissions have been changed or not. Here, I will right-click and I will click on the option Login as to log in with a specific user to access the FTP server. I will leave the username as it is and type the password again. Upon logging in, if I try to delete the file cannot be deleted. If I try to upload a file, again, the user has no permission to upload a file to the FTP server. Means that, now all the users accessing this FTP server with login credentials, will only have the read permissions, until and unless the user has been assigned specific permissions. Now let's suppose, I want this FTP-local user to have the full permissions. What will I do? I will go to the FTP server, in the IIS Manager, on the FTP Authorization Rules page. I will add an allow rule to assign full permissions to this FTP-local user. To create an allow rule, right-click and then in the drop-down menu, click on Add Allow Rule option. On this page, I will first select the option, Specified Users and, I will enter the username FTP-local in the text box. Next, I will check both the checkboxes of read and write permissions. Now, this user will have all the permissions to read, create, rename, delete and upload the documents to this FTP server. Click on the OK button. For confirmation, I will again go to the client PC and simply refresh the page. Since I was already logged in with this user, so I will simply refresh the page, instead of entering the login credentials again. We can see that this user now has all the permissions to create, rename, delete and upload the documents. I will now check the accessibility and permissions to this FTP server with another local user named FTP-local2. So, I will right-click here, and click on the Login as option to log in with another user. In the username box, I will type the name FTP-local2 and enter the password. Upon logging in with the second user, we will see that this user has only the read permission. Because this user can see all the documents on the FTP server. But, if I try to delete, create or upload documents to the FTP server, we will see that this user has limited access to the FTP server. Means that all other users without having specific permissions will only have the read permissions while trying to access the FTP server. That's it. We have successfully configured the local users with basic authentication and specific permissions to access the FTP server. Let's go to the next step. Step number 9. Testing FTP server with domain user and basic authentication. In this step, we will learn that, how to allow a domain user with basic authentication and specific permissions to access this FTP server. To do this, I will go to the IIS Manager, and then, I will click on my FTP site. On the right side, open the FTP authentication. We can see that, anonymous authentication is disabled, whereas the basic authentication is enabled. We configured these authentication settings in the previous step. I will leave it as it is, and go to the FTP authorization page. Here, on FTP authorization rules page, we can see all the authorization rules, which I configured in the previous step. If we have a look at the rules, we will see that the allow rule for all users have been set to read only. I want to add a domain user, which is on the same network, to access this FTP server, with all the read and write permissions. Before adding a domain user, I will just go to the client PC, and from there, I will check that either a domain user, without adding it to the FTP authorization rules, can access this FTP server or not. On the client PC, I will open my computer or this PC and, in the address bar, I will type the full URL to access the FTP server. Since the basic authentication is enabled, so I will have to enter a domain user's credentials. I have already created a user on my domain, named FTP-domain. I will type the domain username. Let me share something important here that, for local users, if I type only the name of the user, that will be enough. But, if it comes to a domain user then, I would recommend to enter fully qualified domain name, in the username box. By FQDN or fully qualified domain name, I mean, always type the full name, like the domain name, then followed by the backslash, and then the username. After entering the username and password, press the Log On button to log into the FTP server. The domain user has successfully logged into the FTP server. Let me verify what permissions this user has. Since in the FTP authorization, the default allow rule was set to read only for all users, that is the reason this domain user must only have the read-only permission. So, to verify that, I will try to create a folder here on FTP server. The folder creation is denied, which means that, this domain user cannot create a folder on this FTP server. It means that, this user has only the read permissions. Now let's suppose, I want this user to have specific permissions, I mean, the read and write permissions, what I will do. Again, it is very simple. I will go to the IIS manager and, under FTP authorization rules, add another allow rule. So here on FTP authorization rule, I will right-click, and then in the drop-down menu, click on the Add Allow Rule option. Same like the local users, I will choose the option Specified Users, and in the text box, I will type the full qualified domain name. I mean, the username along with the domain name. Next, under the permissions, I will check both the checkboxes Read and Write. Click on the OK button. We can see now that, the domain user has been added with read and write permissions. Which means, this domain user can now create, delete, rename, upload and download the data to this FTP server. I will now again, go to the client PC, to verify that, either, this domain user have been assigned new permissions or not. On the client PC, since I was already logged in with the domain user, so, I will simply refresh this page, instead of logging in again. After refreshing the page, let me check the permissions by creating a folder on the FTP server. The folder has been created. I will rename this folder. We can see that, we also have successfully renamed this folder. Now, if I try to delete this folder, we will see that, the folder has been deleted as well. Next I will check the upload permission, by uploading a file from the desktop to this FTP folder. We can see that, this user now also has the upload permission. I hope, now you will have better understanding that, how to configure a domain user with specific permissions. That's it, this step is completed here. Let's dive right into the next step. Step number 10. Testing FTP server with both the basic and anonymous authentication. In the previous steps of this video, I covered that, how to configure local and domain users with basic authentication and specific permissions. Now, let's suppose, I want to allow everyone from any network, to have read-only access when connecting to this FTP server. But at the same time, I also want that, some of the users will have specific permissions upon accessing this FTP server. These users may be local or domain users. Means that, in this step, I will show you how to configure everyone, I mean, all the users who are accessing this FTP server with read-only permission and some local or domain users with specific permissions. To do this, I will go to the IIS Manager, and I will click on my FTP site. Under the FTP authentication, we can see that anonymous authentication is disabled, while the basic authentication is enabled. Since I want everyone to be able to access this FTP server, so I will also enable anonymous authentication. By enabling the anonymous authentication, I am telling this FTP server that, let anyone from any network access this FTP server without any restrictions. Both the basic and anonymous authentication has been enabled now. Now, to assign permissions to different users, I will go to the FTP authorization page. Under the FTP authorization rules. If we look at the rules, we will see that the allow rule for all users is set to read only. Means that, whenever a user from any network accesses this FTP server, that user will be allowed but only with the read permissions. Means that all other users except specific users with specific permissions will be allowed with only read permission. The user can read and download the data from this FTP server, but the user will not be allowed to create, delete, rename or upload the data to this FTP server. The next allow rule, in this case for the user FTP, local, set to both read and write permissions. In the previous step, I have covered that, how to add a local or domain user with specific permissions. Now, I will go to a client PC. From this client PC, I will first access the FTP server as an unknown user, without any credentials. After that, I check that, what permissions an unknown user will have upon accessing this FTP server. I will now open my computer or this PC, and I will enter the full URL, the IP address along with the default port number in the address bar, to access the FTP server. Upon accessing the FTP server, we can see that it didn't ask for any login credentials. This is because we allowed the anonymous users to access the FTP server in IIS Manager. Next, I check the permissions that this anonymous user will have. As we can see that, there is a text file named test upload on the FTP server. It means that this unknown user has the read permission. Secondly, I will try to delete this file. The file deletion is denied, which means that this unknown user do not have any other permissions except the read only. Now, I will try to log in with another user, named FTP-local, which I showed you few seconds before. This FTP-local user has been assigned specific permissions to read and write to the FTP server. To log in with a specific user, I will simply right-click here and, in the drop-down menu, click on the Login as option. I will type the username and the password here, and I will press the Log On button, to log into the FTP server. Upon logging in with the specific user, I will now check all the permissions that this user has been assigned. Firstly, we can see the file uploaded on FTP server, means that this user has read permission. Secondly, I will try to delete this file. We can see that the file is deleted without any error. I will now try to create a folder, and then rename this folder. The folder has been created and renamed as well. If I upload a file FTP server, we will see that the file is uploaded successfully. That's it. I hope you will have now better understanding that how to configure different users with different authentication and authorization permissions. This video has been completed. In the next video, I will show you that how to upgrade or downgrade the firmware of any Ruckus access point via SSH and FTP server. Hi, if you like this video then, do like, share and subscribe to my channel. Thanks.